I would like to now introduce this morning's Dharma talk. Robert Kanjo Schwoch has been a member of our Zen Center at ZLMC here since 2019. He's a lifelong resident of Milwaukee and is, so, right, he's usually one of our Zoomers, so thank you for making the trek in. He is currently a freelance writer. He is a lecturer and advisor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He began his career as a sports writer at several Wisconsin newspapers, including the Milwaukee Journal, and went on to report on politics for the Capital Times in Madison before serving 10 years as a communications specialist and chief of legislative staff in Wisconsin State Assembly and Senate. Then struck out on his own as a political, no, we're not even done yet. And I know, I did some digging on you. And we only have 2 sentences. I thought to add it, and I was like, well, maybe that's a bit much. Okay. He is one of the few people, I thought this was important to add, perhaps the only person to have led both Democratic and Republican legislative offices at the Wisconsin Capitol. He teaches courses in strategic communication, sports reporting, literary journalism, and creative nonfiction at the University of Wisconsin. Right? Yes. Okay. And with that, I think I've covered enough, and I would, yeah. It is with great pleasure that I announce, thank you for being here. This is Robert Kanjo Schwoch with his Dharma talk titled Not Knowing.
The one update from all that, can everybody hear? The one update from all that is I retired a couple months ago from UW. So I'm now emeritus lecturer at UW. I still get over there occasionally, but I'm now no longer all those things at University of Wisconsin. So I retired a couple months ago. All right, welcome everybody. So today's talk is about how to not know things. So in Zen, you hear a lot of talk about not knowing. In my first school, this is my second school, I started in a Korean Zen school, a Korean Sangha up in Wisconsin in Madison, where I was at the time. And don't know was the core teaching of that school. The Korean Zen master who founded that school, a guy named Sung San, was renowned in lectures for like responding to a question with another question instead of answering the question. So somebody would raise their hand and they would say something like, in Zen meditation, is it best to label the thoughts as thinking or just to let the thinking go, just to let the thoughts go? And the Zen master would say, who is asking that question? Instead of answering the question. And the person would say, well, I'm Julie Smith. And he'd say, well, that's just your name. Who are you? And he would keep pressing in that sort of way until the person who was asking the question would just fall silent. And the Zen master would scream, you don't know. That's your true mind. That's just don't know mind. That's you. That was his core teaching. So his teaching slogan was only don't know, go straight, and save all human beings from suffering. That was his teaching slogan. So in this Zen school, the abbot of my Sangha, who's an American, he confessed to me once that he was a little frustrated with all that don't know teaching. He said, it makes us sound like we're supposed to be stupid, And he said, I understand that's not the way we're supposed to look at it. I understand there's more to it, but using that as a slogan, that doesn't sound right to Westerners who like to know things. We're a Western Sangha. We're trying to attract Westerners to our center, and to have don't know as they want to learn things, to have don't know as our slogan, and so he was a little frustrated with that sometimes. And I've struggled with don't know too. And when I left that Sangha, when I left that Korean school, I was a little bit relieved to be done with all this don't know. Except I got here, and it's the Zen Peacemaker's Order, and the very first tenet is not knowing. It's not, so here the 3 tenets are not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. So it's the same thing, only don't know, go straight, save all beings from suffering. It turns out Zen is Zen, you can't escape it. It is what it is. And so I had to wrestle with don't know some more. So the last 3 years or so in the Sangha, I've wrestled some with don't know. And tonight, this morning's about that wrestling and the results of that wrestling, and maybe we can wrestle together about it a little bit. So I'd like to start with a premise that just because not knowing is good, that doesn't mean knowledge is bad. I'd like to start with a premise that there is a difference between knowledge and knowing, a key difference. So I like to think about knowledge as the things we need to know to function like in everyday life, in the relative everyday world of everything acting in relation to everything else. So, for example, if the car breaks down, right, we need knowledge about how to fix it or who to call or where to take it, or we're not going to get anywhere. We need that knowledge. We're not going to say, oh, I don't know, I should not know, you know, and leave the car sit there, right? That's a very basic level. And my students at Wisconsin, they want to be writers. They want to be writers for their career. They felt called for that. So they need some instruction on how to do that, how that goes, so they can go out and have that career and be fulfilled in that calling. So they need that knowledge. I'm not going to say you're not supposed to know how, just do it. You're not supposed to know how to do it, you know. That would be easy. But that's not the way it goes. In Zen, even in Zen, where not knowing is the first tenet, I mean, people who want to begin a meditative practice need basic instruction and need basic knowledge in how that goes. I mean, that's why we offer courses at the center called Foundations of Mindfulness. I'm one of the teachers of that. So that people know the best practices on building a meditative practice that have built up through several thousand years of people meditating. You know, that a lot of knowledge has been built up. And so it's good to know those things. That's knowledge about how it goes. And those who even want to go from there to make Zen their faith, make Zen and Buddhism their faith or their philosophy or their worldview, need basic knowledge about that, about the different, about how the worldview has come about and how other practitioners have come to make this their belief system. So knowledge is not only okay, it's critical, right? We have to have it. We couldn't get through life without it. So there's nothing whatsoever wrong with knowledge. It's knowing that starts to get us in trouble. It's when we start to think that all our accumulated knowledge gives us the idea that we now know, that we have finished learning. Even though knowledge is good and the quest for knowledge is important, right? There's never a point really in which we actually know anything. At least we don't know it for sure and forever. Because as Buddha taught, as we know from our perception and from watching everyday life, everything changes. Everything in the world is changing. It's one of the core teachings of Buddhism. So as soon as we learn something about something, it changes and we have to adjust our learning and we have to adjust our knowledge. So the combustion engine in cars is being replaced by the electric car battery. Well, that's a whole new set of knowledge that drivers and mechanics need to know about cars. It's relearning. That machine has changed and changed and changed and changed, and mechanics and drivers have had to change and change and change and change their learning. There's never a point in which we knew the car. In the teaching of any college subject, newly discovered knowledge and ways of doing things are always coming, and we who teach college have to continually adjust our classes. We hate that. It would be easy if we just could recycle the same syllabus in the same class semester after semester after semester. And in fact, some professors do that, and in fact, all the students know who does that, and they get a certain reputation for that. But there's no subject in which that works, even history. We think the past is fixed, but new discoveries about the past and new ways of looking at the past from the present perspective, change the teaching of history. You know, our interactions with Native Americans have definitely changed the way we look at Columbus Day, for example, right? Yay, explorers. You know, it's not quite that simple anymore. So in Zen, in Buddhism, Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, right? But every day new teachings appear. Books, articles, Dharma talks, interviews with our teachers. And modern life keeps throwing new challenges at meditators. The internet, COVID, you know, that challenged our practice, all those things. And so practitioners in community are always finding new ways of practicing and new ways of making the practice relevant to the current day. So one way of teaching about not knowing might be to understand the impossibility of it, the impossibility of knowing, the impossibility of any fixed truth in the everyday world where everything is in relation to everything else. And in this world of constant change, being okay with that, just sitting with that, sitting with the idea that, yeah, we need to learn what we need to get through the day, but we don't have to push ourselves to know, to any final state of knowledge. We can even be joyful in that. We can be continually refreshed by the change and the challenges it brings in deciding how to respond to the challenges of every day. So I would call all that sort of the entry level of not knowing. It's sort of the knowledge level of not knowing, right? We can take the knowledge that all knowledge is temporary, and that knowledge that we can take the knowledge that knowing is really impossible, and we can use that as a jumping off point to deepen our practice itself, right? I mean, think about it. If knowledge is always shifting and knowing is impossible, can't we all sort of just relax about it, right? Can't we stop trying so hard? Isn't it a lot simpler and a lot less daunting for practitioners, for meditative practitioners, to focus on learning what we need to function right now in the present moment, rather than trying to achieve and maintain some glorified state of knowing that we think will make us smarter or better or safer than our current selves, or worse, better than other people, right? Can't we let that go? So to give an example of that might be appropriate with election day coming up, politics, and I've worked in politics for a long time. So some of you may know, some of you who've been around the center may know that I just became a dual citizen of the European country of Luxembourg. It happened entirely by accident. I had no idea that my family was Luxembourgish, neither did any of my family. We didn't know that our great-great-grandparents came from Luxembourg. They married German women. They were in a German town. They were in a town of Milwaukee where half the people are German. We just thought we were German like everybody else. But it turns out that Luxembourg's trying to repatriate the direct descendants of the people who came there. Many of them came to Wisconsin, and there's a society in Wisconsin that's helping people build family trees to find the descendants so they can offer them citizenship. And I popped up on a friend's family tree, a Luxembourgish friend's family tree. She came running up to me, you know, at an event, and she said, "Bob, are you gonna be a citizen of Luxembourg?" I was like, "What? I'm not Luxembourgian." She said, "Luxembourgish," and yes, you are. My cousin and I ended up gathering up all our birth records and all the records going back to our ancestors in Luxembourg and taking them to Luxembourg, and they gave us citizenship papers. They gave us citizenship. And at first when we got there, and neither of us had ever seen Luxembourg before, at first when we got there, we thought, oh, this is cute. How novel, we get to be citizens of this little country. We weren't expecting to identify with it in any sort of way. We felt it was rather random that we were there. We've lost our connection with our ancestry. But as we spent time there, we started recognizing ourselves and our family in this place in an eerie sort of way. The features of the people, the mannerisms, The food, like the white Moselle wine they would drink. Why does our family always drink that? Well, it's from Luxembourg. By the way, some of it's in the silent auction. I brought some to the silent auction, so if you want to bid on Luxembourgish wine. Even some of the sayings we would hear, we thought were German, were, they were Luxembourgish. We went out in the countryside, and the countryside looked just like Wisconsin. No wonder they went there. But my cousin Chris Nithy explains a lot to her. So clearly we were of this place without having known it. So the knowledge of Luxembourgishness was completely separate from the being of it. So that in and of itself is a lesson in not knowing. I mean, maybe the best kind of knowing and the deepest kind of knowing is in our bones, not in our heads, right? So maybe the best kind of knowing is more felt than thought. And we got there and we realized we had felt this place all through our lives. Now our heads knew it, but it wasn't as important as what we had, as our experience of it. Anyway, one thing about being citizens of Luxembourg is that we can now vote in Luxembourg. In fact, we have to, because not voting is illegal in Luxembourg. You can get fined if you don't vote. Now, we understand it's not enforced that strictly, but what I'm really scared of is they'll cut my Luxembourgish social security number off the nationwide free internet, which you can do when your country's only 57 miles long and 35 miles wide. You can wire the whole place for internet. And so, I mean, I want to vote anyway, but you have to. So we're taking this voting thing pretty seriously, and I'm learning all about Luxembourgish politics. I'm taking it pretty seriously. I'm reading up on all the issues, all the candidates, all the parties. And like many places in Europe, there's many parties. Even in a country of only 700,000 people, there's a lot of political parties. And they have to have coalitions, governments, because nobody can win 50%. So when they have parliamentary elections, the couple of parties that win the most will form a coalition and they will govern. So one party that has sort of caught my eye is called the Pirate Party. So this originated in Sweden. It's actually a Swedish political party, but it's gone Europe-wide. And they have a handful of seats in European Parliament. We can also vote in European elections because Luxembourg is a member of the EU. And they have a couple seats in the Luxembourgish Parliament. And the Pirate Party's thing is remaking law in light of the information society, remaking it in light of the internet, and in light of the instantaneous worldwide communication, all the issues that raises as far as privacy and copyright, and so they support things like copyright only for commercial use, information's free for individuals. They support big new protections on right of privacy in light of the way that the internet intrudes on your private life. Much broader protections for free speech. They believe in that if free speech needs to be protected. Anyway, I mentioned to a politically knowledgeable and very progressive friend of mine that I was thinking about supporting the Pirate Party in Luxembourg. And she sort of gasped and said, "Oh my God, they're conservative." I said, "What? They are?" I mean, nothing they were for sounded particularly conservative to me in the American sense of the word, right? But I looked it up, and yeah, because the Pirate Party is kind of seen as libertarian, supporting free speech, and because libertarian in the United States has come to be associated in some extent with the right, particularly with the right to own a gun. So in America, libertarians have sort of become known as conservatives. They've been put in the conservative box in the US. So as soon as you support civil liberties, that starts to think you're on the right, some people. Anyway, allow me to propose that not knowing means not having to put everything in a box, which is another way of saying not having to give everything a label, which is another way of saying non-attachment to name and form, which is something Buddha taught. When we put something in a box, we cut off our learning about it. We cut off new knowledge about it. We think we know, and that actually is against knowledge. It's against new knowledge. We cut off knowledge and we get stuck in knowing. Both political sides in our country do that. That's part of our stalemate. Even though polls show again and again that liberals and conservatives agree on a lot of issues, maybe even most issues, they have basic agreement when they ask, well, do you support X? Do you support Y? There'll often be wide agreement. 70% of people support this, 80%, abortion is an example, right? But being on one side or the other makes us feel like we belong and makes us feel good, and it makes us feel superior. And the knowing ones, we're the smart ones, the other side's the bad one. We stop listening. We stop learning. We close down instead of opening up, right? Now, I'm not saying we should all drop our party affiliation or our political label. I mean, and agree about everything. The labels have utility in that relative world. We need them because we don't have time. When somebody asks, well, what's your political views? You don't have time to list every one of them, right? If it's easier to say I'm a progressive or, I'm a Democrat, no, I'm a Republican. And so those labels have utility. But we have to be careful about our labels not becoming badges of exclusion and superiority. That's really important. And we have to open our minds to when our views might need an adjustment, when somebody else who we might not agree with has a point. So not knowing politically means we have to listen closely and honestly to all sides and views so we can perceive when we agree and why we disagree. Now, we can call the other side out when we think they're being unfair or harmful. We have to do that. We're called to do that. But even when we do that, I think it's important, especially as Zen practitioners, as Buddhists, it's important to do that in an open and compassionate sort of way and not in an accusatory sort of way. We want to model that for everybody. So that the other side doesn't simply perceive what we're saying as the same old unthinking reaction as being a closed-minded thing and react in the same way. And that causes the stalemate that our country finds itself in right now. So not knowing means opening to all knowledge, all possibility. And another word we can use for opening to everything is meditation, right? That's basically what meditation is. Now, remember that politics, and I think people forget what politics is, it's just the democratic competition to see who gets to make policy. That's all politics is. It's not a war, it's not a personal vendetta, it's about who gets to make the policy. And another word for policy is problem solving. So it's a democratic competition to see who gets to solve our problems. That's what politics is. Now, so it's problem solving on sort of a public level. By the way, this hot water is genius. I wish I'd known that when I was teaching. So politics is problem solving on a public level, but I've learned that not knowing can really be helpful for problem solving on a personal level too. So I don't know about you, but my default mode when I'm faced with a difficult personal problem is to try to think it to death. That is sort of what I grew up. That was my sort of conditioning from my upbringing and my ancestors, and I don't know, maybe that's what Luxembourg does, I don't know. But that's what I inherited. And so my mind will spin endless scenarios and possibilities and how I might respond. And it's trying to come up with every possible circumstance and outcome. It's like a coach planning to go, for a game. That's the way I approach a problem sometimes. And I'm also a writer, which is even worse. So I'll start to write things down. I'll write down the whole problem, all the aspects of it. I'll write down, how I feel about it, make pros and cons lists when I have to make a decision. Here's the pros, and I'll weight them. Well, this pro's worth 3, that con's worth 2. And kind of striving to know the answer. And the problem, of course, is personal life is way too complex. Life is way too complex to be reduced to that. And our minds are too puny. They don't perceive enough. They don't have enough information in them to make decisions in that way. So we can never know exactly what's going to happen. We can't know what others involved in our predicament might be thinking. We can't know that perfectly. And guessing at all that can be worse than not doing anything and waiting for clarity to arrive. So over the past few years, I've faced some of the most difficult personal problems of my life. I lost a spouse of 30 years suddenly, had a diagnosis of cancer. And those problems did me a big favor. They did me a big service because they broke my attempts to think problems into submission and try to find an answer, because there was no answer to any of that. No quick answer anyway. I wasn't going to solve grief in a day or a week or with some strategy. All I could do was figure out how to be okay in the current moment and take it moment by moment. I found out that that had to go more by instinct than like trying to know what to do. Kind of the bones level rather than the head level of knowing. So what I've learned to do, and this center has helped me do this, because the loss of my spouse was what drove me to find a new faith community when I was living in a place that was not near my old Sangha. I've learned to treat the intractable life problem like a koan, like one of these questions that Zen students solve that don't have real, actual answers. I try not to think intellectually about big problems anymore. Instead, let it settle into the recesses of the mind and the bones. Open the mind and air out the problem with the perception of everything else that's going on in my field of perception. You could call that meditating on the problem. You're dropping your thoughts about it and just letting it be. Now, people tend to think meditating on a problem to mean thinking about it. That's not true, you know. But it doesn't necessarily mean not thinking about it either. You don't want to ignore the problem and just not think about it and wait for it to solve itself that way. The trick, I think, is to let go of your limited thoughts and ideas and let all the data of the universe come in, and let your incredibly complex mind, subconscious mind, put all that stuff together. And the human mind is way more complex than just the verbalized thought. It's way more sensitive than that. And I'm starting to learn that consciousness will solve a problem if you let it. I found if I let the question sort of go off on its own, it will come back with what to do if I just hold it, in consciousness. Often that comes as sort of an aha moment. That can happen in meditation. Sometimes I get an aha moment in meditation. That's why Zoom's a little better sometimes. I'm not in the Dharma room when I go, wait. But it can also happen on a walk, in the shower. It can happen like while doing the dishes, while driving. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, this is what I should be doing. I have to stop going to basketball games as a retreat from my grief, because my grief is never going to process that way. I have to stop making social. This is what I did early in my grief, is I made 1 million social appointments, so I didn't have to sit at home alone. Well, I realized that my grief was never going to process that way, so I was going to have to face it. And I went out and got some therapy and got in some groups, and that helped. I would think, you know what? No matter what the next medical test result is, mortality is coming for me at some point, sooner or later, right? Sooner or later, you don't get the happy test. And so, my mental state about it is the problem. That's what I have to work on, right? Once I've done all I can medically about my illness, I have to work on my relationship with mortality. Otherwise cancer will drive me crazy. And I eventually got very good test results for my cancer. It was early stage, but it might not have been. It could come back. So, I realized I can't just go from hopeful hopeful situation, a hopeful situation, a hopeful situation. At a certain point, time runs out for everybody. Time's going to run out for me. And so I have to make peace with that, not with, cancer. So sometimes the aha is that there's actually no problem at all. That it's my perspective on it that's the problem. So like if I'm feeling neglected by my new partner, maybe he just needs some space. And wait, I do too. Wow, hey, I've got space. I can turn on a basketball game. So, so sometimes it's that, wow, there's no problem here. This is just the way it's supposed to be. I'm seeing it as a problem, and I just have to adjust my. No, that's not always the case. Sometimes your perspective is correct, and there is a problem, but sometimes there isn't. If you're not opening your mind to all possibility and all the data of all the universe that's out there, you won't have that. You won't be able to have that perspective. It won't come. You've premeditated the problem into being. So not knowing means for me letting go of the need to know, letting the world do its own work. And I stopped trying to box everything or think everything to death or verbalize everything to death as a writer. That's something that I would do. And in fact, I've devised sort of a personal meditation technique around this. Instead of merely trying to let go of thoughts as they come, which can work, but I find that if I let one go, the next one's right there, So like, how many thoughts can you let go of in 20 minutes? Now I try to recognize when the thought is turning into an English sentence, and I try to head it off before it's in English. If I can just not, I can still think, but if I can just not think in full English sentences, I can achieve something resembling a meditative state. Now, for a word addict like me, that is very challenging to try and cut words off out of your thinking. It's very scary, but I find it very effective. Finally, I've found also that not knowing can be an effective strategy in confronting that great problem of impermanence. Not knowing is great for confronting your own impermanence, the impermanence of the world, the impermanence of each of us. We all have sort of a root fear of death. Right? I would think. Maybe some of you don't. I do. Can we admit to ourselves, though, that we don't know what that is? None of us knows what's going to happen after this life. Can we let go of the false knowing and fear about that? I mean, the fear of it is all from thinking we know, right? We're inventing a scary death or an annihilation, and then we're afraid of that. Can we just realize we're inventing that it might not be real? And can we just achieve a state of not knowing about that instead? And maybe that not knowing state can turn into curiosity instead of fear. It might even turn into wonder instead of fear, or awe instead of fear. No Zen master, no priest, no prophet, not even Buddha knew what was going to happen after death. Nobody. Anybody who says they know that is, there's two initials for that, B and S. And anyone who says death is X is making that up. And I mean, on the cross, Christ yelled at God for forsaking him. So Jesus didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knows, all right? Now, we can make educated guesses about that. We can look at the world around us and see that endings tend to bring beginnings, that death tends to bring renewal, right? The leaf falls off the tree. I don't want to be too cliche, but the leaf falls off the tree, it disintegrates, nourishes the ground, a new thing pops up. We see that around us, right? So we can kind of think that death might be not an ending, but some sort of renewal. We have sort of ideologically that death is not a finish, but a change. And that's where a lot of Buddhist philosophy comes from. Just like everything in the earth changes, and we know in physics nothing can be destroyed, right? So looking at the way the world works, we can think that maybe death works that way. We don't know. Death could be completely weird. We don't know. But But if it follows the rules of life, that would be, it's a change. It's a change that brings some sort of renewal and new being. But we can't be sure about it, and that's one of the great instruments of life, is that we can't be sure of what comes next. How much suffering is really possible when we decide not to know about impermanence, when we decide not to know what's next? How much can we really suffer? What if we could just approach that point with openness and curiosity instead of fear? What if death is the coolest thing ever? What if? I mean, haven't we all wasted so much fear over that? I mean, wouldn't your former self wish you just chose not to know about it? If you're up, death is hors d'oeuvres in a party, who knows? So maybe we should just choose not to know about certain things, and not knowing is better than inventing. So I'm going to close with a quote. Oh, this is good. I'm going to close with a quote that our fine Shuso Myogetsu used in one of her great talks. She's giving talks. She's in our Ango. We have a 3-month-long practice period, intensive practice period going on, and every other Tuesday night, Myogetsu is giving a lecture. She's teaching Lojong, which is slogans. It's teaching surrounding Buddhist slogans. The talks are awesome. They're awesome. And except I was mad that she stole this quote from me, because I was going to use this exact same passage. And I'm like, oh, she beat me to it. That's why she wears a robe. But I'm going to use, actually, you used part of this, and I'm going to use a passage of this. This is from the root teacher of our Sangha, Maizumi Roshi. And this, I don't know where you found it, but I found it in Lion's Roar, the Buddhist magazine. And they had turned one of Taizumi's Teisho's Dharma talks into an article quoting him. And so the passage you used, I'm going to use a bigger piece of it, but the passage you used is in there. So he taught, Maizumi Roshi taught, we shouldn't mix up the fact of our life with our thoughts about our life. What we think and what actually is, that's what Buddha talks about as constant change. Anything and everything constantly changing. That's the real life, which is, in a way, unknowable. And that unknowable, impersonal no self, unfixed by any kind of values, attachments, detachments, works perfectly. Knowing nothing, it works completely. That is what this life is. That is what is expressed as no self. When you don't see this, suffering is waiting for you. When you see it, there is nirvana or peace. So that's what Maizumi Roshi and I have to say for today, and I welcome any comments, thoughts, or questions. I probably could have just read that, but I needed to fill an hour. 45 minutes, yeah.
Well, I'm happy to open it to any comments, questions, suggestions, either online or in the room.
That was lovely, Kanjo.
Thank you.
I was thinking of Bernie when you were talking about this, and of course Bernie was a big Zen teacher, and sometimes he'd say something, profound, like the only thing we have in common is our differences. But towards the end of his life, he would always say something, and then he'd follow it with, well, it's just my opinion, man. It's a great Zen teacher, right? It's just my opinion, man. And then I heard him once with a group of Buddhists give a talk, and because Bernie was a clown and he liked to make trouble, he was a little mischievous, he was giving a talk about Buddhism, and he said, yeah, the Four Noble Truths, it's just the Four Noble Opinions. And all the Buddhists, they all got upset, It's like, really? You think it's just an opinion? He had a lot of opinions, so
Yeah.
Lovely talk. Thank you.
The Four Noble Opinions wouldn't draw people into the Zen Center. Come and hear our opinions.
I imagine you have a lot of brilliant things to say, and probably many that has already been written. So thank you for your speech today.
Thanks.
As you were speaking, I had some visceral reactions as you spoke about identifying with your getting your new citizenship, and how you were able to go back and do that ancestral check to find out where, who, and someone was from. And I thought how liberating that must feel to make those connections, because I don't have those. All right.
We had lost ours, so
yeah, mine, my history, the answer, and just to think about to make a connection with something that you recently learned, and to say, oh, perhaps I got that from this or that. And so it was just powerful. I thought like a loss of identity is detriment as opposed to having it. And my question was, when we think about that not knowing, as I exist with it, and many of people like me, how do we find peace?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what the whole practice is about, is trying to find peace in this big and perfect world that's constantly changing and constantly impermanent. And I mean, that's more a question for the Zen master. But I mean, but
I don't know.
meditative practice is how we're all addressing that problem. We're trying to take our thinking about it, which can never match that sort of problem. We're never going to think those sort of challenges away. But if we open to that challenge and let all the change and occurrences and phenomena of the world into our mind without picking and choosing, our minds are so complex that they'll start to find ways of coping, ways of finding peace. And look, I mean, people have been doing this practice for 2,500 years more. There must be something to it, right? And it's certainly been something to it for me. I mean, I went through horrible problems in my life. And this was the only, I mean, what originally brought me to practice was the HIV/AIDS crisis, which I came out into as a young gay man, and my friends were dying all over. My husband's brother died of it. We were his caregivers, and there was no way, there was no place to put that. There was no way to solve that. But Zen helped me understand, you know, this is all part of impermanence. These are the things that you get when you open to a meditative practice, that there are some things we can't know. We have to deal with what's going to happen now, and you know, that's the practice.
Thank you.
Robert, thank you so much. You may have seen tears running down my face while you were talking. It was a beautiful talk. Thank you so much. And I want to ask one question about the politics. And the question, I guess, is, as a citizen here, we have to choose who is going to set policy for our government. And I guess there's two major choices, the Republican side or the Democrat side. And I'm not saying I know what's permanent forever, that Democrats will always be wonderful. No, or if they're wonderful now, I'm not sure, but I do have to make a decision. And I'm thinking, is it okay that I can sit here and say, I know that the right choice for me right now is X, you know?
Yep, you have to do that, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that we should give up our political views. We should have, our political views should be strongly held. We just have to be careful not to use them as a battering ram. And we have to stay open to when our views might change. So we, you know, because the world is constantly changing. We can't know anything. What's right at this moment, we go to the ballot box and we vote according to what we think is right at this moment, and that's what we have to do. But we, you know, we have to be open to listening and adjusting our views. I mean, my husband was from North Dakota, not a particularly liberal place. And we would go home, you know, we would go home to his family. We were quite the sensation when we would show up in Bowdoin, North Dakota, population 90. And those there, I mean, but they were families, so we could listen very carefully to their views. Now, we never came to a point where I would agree with, but I sure understood where they came from, where they were being completely left. There was a farm community that was being completely left behind by the information society and by industrialization. And the solution that progressives are throwing at them is go to college. And they're like, where? You know? So, you know, at least I got to understand, and that comes from listening. And if we can just understand where it comes from, maybe we can respond in a more compassionate way. And then maybe that other side will listen to our side. But it's not, doesn't mean we shouldn't have political views. So we just have to be open to changing them.
That's a lovely question. And you know, there's a danger in Zen practice of being quiescent and passive. And you could take the teaching of not knowing that way, that I'm above it all, you know, because now I've realized something, I have perfect peace or something. But keep in mind that the not knowing is always framed in terms of not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. So the not knowing allows us to learn about our world in a way, hopefully, that brings some wisdom and compassion. And the bearing witness is how we now engage with suffering and our confusion and the whole everything, everything. So the not knowing allows us to bear witness, to engage. And then when we do that, then we take action. So it's a lovely question, because I think it's a pitfall of a lot of sometimes in Zen that we think, you know, if I sit, everything will be okay. It's
for a long time I was a Republican.
It doesn't matter what party you are. We're not going to talk about partisan politics here. It's a political season. It's all right. It's a political season, and we all have, but we should, I hope everyone goes out and votes. That's taking action.
I'm going to Luxembourg this Thursday, and I'm voting before I go.
Kanjo, what a beautiful talk. Thank you so much. It was so inspiring. And I was particularly struck by how you made the teachings integrate into your life. And we've talked about that in Ango, like just the way that we enliven the teachings.
Yeah, the slogans are one way to do it. They brings
Absolutely.
the teachings into practical use.
Absolutely. And just your joy and your humor, just a lovely, lovely talk. Thank you so much.
You're my example.
Any thoughts or comments, questions online? Anyone else here? I'd love to hear from some Zoomers.
I just want to say thank you so much. I just really got so much out of the talk, and I'm going to sit with a lot of it. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah, Robert, hi. Even though you're a Packer fan, I still love you. I see the Buddha in you everywhere.
Well, you know, we have a lot of compassion for the Bears fans. You know, we all want to be sensitive about the disadvantaged among us.
Okay, I think we're bringing it to a close then. Any last comments, questions, thoughts? With that, we are ready to move to the community room for snacks and refreshments. Thank you, Kanjo, for a wonderful talk. So appreciate you being here. Bye, Zoomers. We miss you.